I looked at Larry now, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, letting Sarah conquer him in some make-believe monster battle. She squealed with laughter, climbing on top of him. Larry groaned in mock defeat, flopping onto the couch cushions. There was nothing but giggles between them. "Monica," my mother shouted from the kitchen. "Stop daydreaming. The chicken's going to burn." I blinked, snapped back to the present, and rushed to the stove. The chicken was starting to blacken around the edges. I flipped the pieces over and lowered the heat. A few minutes later, we all sat around the dinner table. "Larry," I said while adjusting Sarah's plate, "I've got a job next week. Mom can't watch her on Wednesday. Can you?" "I'll make it happen, babe," he replied easily. Looking at Sarah, he added with a grin, "Guess that means Graddon's going down on Wednesday, huh?" She beamed, proud of her monster-slaying skills. Freelance interior design wasn't just about money. It gave me a sense of control, something Larry couldn't manage for me. Most months I only took 1 or 2 projects, just enough to stay grounded. Being a stay-at-home mom had its joys, but it could feel like fading into the wallpaper. The work reminded me I still had something of my own. Larry had always been dependable, generous to a fault. We met years ago on a job site. He was the project manager, I was assisting a designer. He was smart, patient, and kind. We dated for 3 years before getting married, then Sarah came along, a happy accident that changed everything. She was 6 now, all fire and sweetness. She had my dark eyes and Larry's unshakable spirit. She was our greatest adventure. After my father died, my mom moved in. I was nervous about asking, but Larry just nodded and got to work. He turned our garage into a cozy mother-in-law suite within a month, no complaints, no hesitation. That's who he was, always showing up, always solving problems before they could land. And maybe that was the problem. He was too good at that, reading me, solving me, smoothing every wrinkle before it turned into a fold. Larry, dependable to a fault. He brought me coffee before I got out of bed, kept my car tuned, remembered every anniversary, and still left sticky notes with silly jokes on the bathroom mirror. Most women would call it a dream. But sometimes, I needed to struggle a little. I needed to feel the burn before the bomb. Life with Larry had become easy. Too easy. He smoothed every rough edge, filled every silence. There was no room left to feel the friction that reminds you you're alive. I had started working again not for the money, but to wrestle with something Larry couldn't fix. I didn't realize then what that choice would cost me. The following Wednesday, I made my way to Front Street. It was a newly constructed multi-floor office building, modern glass facade, crisp lines, still smelling faintly of fresh drywall and concrete dust. The permits had all been approved, and the team was finally ready to move into the design phase. That's where I came in. The lights were already on in the lobby when I arrived. Through the glass doors, I saw a man and a woman hunched over a table, studying a spread of architectural plans. I stepped inside, the heels of my boots echoing on the polished tile floor. "Hello," I said with a practiced smile. "I'm Monica Gordon." The woman turned toward me, shaking my hand warmly. "Ashley Benson," she replied, returning the smile with one of her own. The man remained bent over the table. Without looking up, he said, punctual, like always. "Right, Nikki?" I blinked, confused by the nickname. But then he straightened and turned to face me. "Tony?" I breathed, recognition crashing over me. He grinned and walked toward me with open arms. I instinctively stiffened, straightening my posture and extending a hand for a professional shake. But Tony paused mid-step, his expression faltering. "For real?" he asked, a little hurt showing in his eyes. Then, without waiting, he closed the gap and pulled me into a hug, a familiar, all-encompassing embrace I hadn't felt in nearly a decade. For one surreal moment, I let myself remember. Then I gently pushed him away, my face still lit with surprise. "What are you doing here?" I asked, the excitement in my voice betraying me. "I'm back," he said cheerily. "My exile has ended. Tony and I had a history, complicated, messy, unfinished. We were childhood friends, first loves, even briefly engaged. We probably would have married, if not for one thing: Tony was a Milton. The Miltons were nouveau riche, and Tony's father had clawed his way from nothing to running a billion-dollar hedge fund. The more success he earned, the harder he worked to erase his impoverished beginnings. Though Tony grew up on my block, his family eventually moved to the wealthier part of town, leaving our childhood behind. We reconnected in college. Tony followed me to the same university, swearing it had nothing to do with me. But once his father learned we were together again, he gave Tony an ultimatum: stay and be cut off, or move to Europe and work in the company's international office. Tony chose the money. Now here he was, back. We walked the building together, but it wasn't exactly a professional tour. We reminisced more than we reviewed plans. I tried to steer us back on track when I noticed Ashley giving us uncomfortable side glances, but Tony didn't care. After nearly 2 hours of tangents and nostalgia, he waved her off. Let's finish up without her, he said with a wink. Every instinct I had as a married woman screamed at me to leave. My mind whispered warnings: this was dangerous. This was the start of something that couldn't end well. But instead of walking out, I smiled and said, lead the way. And if I had walked away then, maybe everything would be different. We walked and talked until the sun began to dip behind the city skyline, casting long golden shadows across the unfinished walls. The warm light washed over Tony's face, softening the years between us. It had been hours, but it didn't feel like it, not until I looked at my watch and realized how late it had gotten. I should be heading back, I said, reluctant but aware. Tony smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Not just yet. Come with me. He led me through a side door to the attached parking garage. I followed, confused, until I stepped inside and froze. There, in the middle of the concrete floor, was a candlelit table. A white linen cloth draped across it, silverware already set. A private chef stood beside a portable cooktop, plating something elegant, while a waiter arranged glasses of wine. I blinked. Tony, what is this? He shrugged, casual. Dinner. I figured the day was going well, so why not end it right? It was the kind of over-the-top gesture I would have rolled my eyes at in a movie. But standing there in the golden glow of dusk, with the scent of rosemary and butter in the air, my heart stuttered. It was ridiculous. It was surreal. It was Tony. Still tall, still broad-shouldered and devastatingly handsome. The years had added something to him, a confidence, a gravity. He hadn't changed, not really, and that was the problem. Because despite everything, my head wasn't doing a great job keeping up with my heart. We sat. We ate. We laughed more than I had in months. He told me stories of Europe, chateaux in France, late-night train rides in Italy, business meetings that turned into vineyard tours. Each tale more animated than the last, and every few minutes, he'd say something like, "You would have loved it," or "wish you'd been there." Like we were still we. After dessert, we shifted our chairs closer, huddling over our phones, showing off old photos and newer ones. He pulled up a video of us from college, dancing horribly at a Halloween party. I was laughing, really laughing, when I finally glanced down at my phone. 10 missed calls. All from Larry and my mother. Panic hit me in a cold wave. I always put my phone on Do Not Disturb when I was working, but now the sun was gone and so was my excuse. I was hours overdue. I opened my messages. The first few were light, "Hey, everything okay?" Then they grew more frantic. My mother's last message made my stomach drop. "Larry's tearing the house apart looking for the address. He's about to call the cops." I jumped to my feet, swearing under my breath. Tony looked up, alarmed. "Nikki? Are you all right?" "No, Tony," I said, grabbing my bag. "The whole house is going crazy trying to find me, and I didn't call once." I gestured wildly toward the table. "If Larry shows up here and sees this..." Tony chuckled, unbothered. "Then I think you better head home before they file a missing persons report." I didn't even argue. I just nodded and turned, already pulling up Larry's contact as I walked away. He picked up on the first ring. "Monica? Are you okay?" His voice was tight, strained with worry. I could hear my mother yelling in the background. "Larry, I'm fine," I said quickly. I didn't realize how late it was. The project ended up being a lot bigger than I thought. I had my phone on Do Not Disturb. "I'm so sorry." It was half true. A useful lie, one I needed to stick to. Because Larry didn't know about Tony. He didn't even know I'd been engaged once. Tony had never come up. When Tony told me years ago about his father's ultimatum, stay and be cut off or leave for Europe, I thought it would crush me. And it did. I had loved him. Deeply. Foolishly. He was the center of my world, and I thought we were heading toward our fairy tale ending. But he left. 4 months, I was a wreck. It took everything I had not to call him, not to beg. Eventually, I realized how selfish it would have been to expect him to give up everything for me, his career, his inheritance, his future. So, I buried the pain, let time dull the edges, and moved on. Or at least, I thought I had. Larry never asked much about my past, and I never offered. Why stir ghosts? But my mother? She knew. She had lived it with me. And she never liked Tony. Where I saw charm, she saw arrogance. Where I saw spontaneity, she saw instability. She called him a storm in a designer coat. When he left, she didn't say "I told you so," but her silence said enough. "Good riddance," she had muttered more than once. And now? He was back. Sitting in a parking garage under dim lights, creating memories I knew I had no right to. I hung up the call and exhaled. My hands were shaking. Whatever this was, whatever I had allowed it to be today, it couldn't happen again. But even as I told myself that, I wasn't sure if I believed it. When I got home, Larry walked straight over and wrapped me in a tight hug. His hands lingered a moment longer than usual before he pulled back, holding my face gently between his palms. "If you ever do that again," he said, his voice low and firm, "I swear." He didn't finish. Instead, he leaned in to kiss me, but I took a quick step back, arms outstretched in exaggerated apology, even giving a playful little bow. It was a calculated move. That sweet little kiss would have exposed the wine I'd been drinking with Tony. The scent still clung to my breath, no matter how hard I'd tried to rinse it out. Larry looked slightly thrown off by my retreat, his brows knitting together for a split second. But then I saw it in his eyes, he thought it was guilt. I let the moment hang, then jumped on it. "Did I worry Sarah?" I asked, faking concern. "Was she okay?" He shook his head. "She got to bed just fine. I told her you were working late on a big new project." "Let me take a shower," I said quickly, before he could ask anything else. "I'll tell you all about it after." In the bathroom, I scrubbed hard, washed away the perfume, the sweat, the wine, and every trace of the evening I didn't want following me into the next. I needed to come out clean. Literally and figuratively. When I returned to the living room, I brought my phone and the documents I'd taken from the job site. I sat next to Larry, casually slipping into the role of excited wife on a new adventure. "This is the building," I said, swiping through the photos I'd carefully selected, none with Tony in them. "They want a full interior redesign. Every floor. It's going to be a huge challenge." Larry leaned in, genuinely interested. This was his world too, construction, project management. It was one of the things we'd always connected over. But as he scrolled through the floor plans, the enthusiasm in his expression began to fade, replaced with a look I couldn't quite name. "This is a lot of work, Monica," he said finally, eyes scanning the drawings again. "Like, a lot." "I know," I said, smiling despite the small knot forming in my stomach. "Isn't it exciting?" He shook his head slowly. "You're a one-person team. This project," he tapped the blueprints, calculating in real time, "would normally require a crew of at least 20. The timeline they'd expect you to finish this in, it doesn't make sense." Of course he was right. He had led jobs bigger than this one. He knew how much labor went into a project of this scale. And he was putting the pieces together, something didn't add up. I could see it on his face. I snatched the papers from his hands, more defensive than I intended. Larry, I can handle this. And I don't appreciate you saying I can't. That's not what I'm saying, he replied quickly, hands up in surrender. I just don't want you to set yourself up for failure. Still hot, I snapped. Did it occur to you that maybe they've seen my work and think I'm good enough for the job? He exhaled slowly, lips pressing into a thin line. Then he turned to my mother, who was watching silently from her usual seat. I think I'm going to head to bed before I get myself into more trouble, he said quietly. Mom. He nodded toward her as he left the room. My mother watched him go, then turned those sharp eyes on me. She didn't speak at first, just studied me like she had when I was little and lying through my teeth. You stay out all night, she said finally, have the whole house in an uproar, then come home and dress down your understanding husband? Her voice was calm, but each word landed like a stone. Either Larry doesn't know you like I do, she continued, or he's letting you off the hook. I said nothing. She stood, smoothing the hem of her robe. Every time you pulled something like this when you were growing up, it wasn't because you were mad. It was because you were guilty. That hit hard. For a terrifying moment, I was sure she'd seen something in my face, some tiny betrayal that gave Tony away. But as she walked toward her room, her voice softened. We all lose track of time, baby, she said, pausing at her door. But tonight, you should be the one feeling sorry, not Larry. She closed the door behind her, and I stood there in stunned silence. Then, as the tension broke, a strange relief washed over me, like escaping a close call. A small, involuntary chuckle escaped my lips. That's when my phone buzzed. See you tomorrow, Nikki. I stared at the screen, heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't quite fear, but it wasn't joy either. It was something between nervous excitement and looming dread. I slipped into the bedroom, where Larry was already under the covers. I kissed his shoulder. Then his cheek. Then curled into him, giving him the best apology he could ever ask for. I met Tony at the building, carrying my plans in a leather case slung over my shoulder. As I approached, I waved. He smiled, that same effortless grin that used to melt every defense I had, and walked over to greet me with a warm hug and a kiss on the cheek. What's that? He asked, nodding toward the bag. Our vision, I said confidently, pulling it off my shoulder and handing it to Ashley, who'd just come outside. She took it wordlessly, but her eyes followed Tony with a wary sharpness. Just then, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Come on, Nikki, Tony said, placing a hand gently on the small of my back, guiding me toward the car. Where are we going? I asked, glancing back at the building. I thought we were. We're going to get inspired, he said with a sly wink. Design is a matter of vision, and I have something I want you to see. We drove for about 20 minutes before pulling up to a towering building, sleek lines, glass shimmering in the daylight. A far cry from the modest one we were working on. He led me inside, and we rode the elevator all the way to the roof. That's when I heard it. The rhythmic thump of blades cutting air. A helicopter? I said, mouth half open as I stared. Tony grinned, placing his hands over my ears as the rotors grew louder. Adventure doesn't wait, Nikki. Before I could protest, we were in the air. We flew for about an hour, gliding over rolling hills before landing near a gorgeous villa perched high above the city. The view was breathtaking, old stone walls draped with ivy, a lush garden wrapped around the terrace. A table was already set for two. We lunched. Talked. Laughed. He told stories about places he'd visited, people he'd met, mistakes he wished I'd been there to help him avoid. Then, like a scene stolen from a movie, he offered his hand and pulled me into a slow dance under the late afternoon sun. Tony, I whispered, my head resting on his chest, the wine and music dulling the alarms going off in my head. I can't do this. Do what, Nikki? He asked, his voice soft but teasing. This, I repeated, eyes still closed, fighting the growing weight of guilt in my chest. Last time I got home so late. Everyone was worried. He tilted my chin gently until I was looking at him. We're just two old friends, he said, his lips only inches from mine, catching up. On work. For a second, I thought he was going to kiss me. My body froze, torn between wanting it and needing to pull away. But just then, we heard the faint beat of rotors again. Tony stepped back and smiled. See? I'll have you home in time for whatever the Gordons do at 6:30 sharp. On the flight back, we sat close. We laughed. Talked about nothing and everything. Somewhere along the way, our fingers intertwined, as naturally as if they'd never stopped doing it. When I got home, no alarms were raised, yet. Dinner was already in motion. Mom was stirring something on the stove, humming softly. Larry was on the floor, building block towers with Sarah, who squealed with delight every time one toppled over. I rushed straight to the bathroom, barely saying hello, needing to wash Tony off me before I could play the role of happy wife and mother again. A quick shower later, I stepped into the kitchen, my smile stretched wide, masking the chaos buzzing just beneath the surface. I joined them like nothing had changed. But something had. Tony had lit something in me, an ember I hadn't even realized was still there. Spontaneous lunches, helicopter rides, the almost kiss that still lingered on my lips. I shook my head, trying to dispel the warmth creeping through me. Larry, I said suddenly, the words spilling out of me before I even knew why. I need your help in the office. He looked up from the floor, confused but obliging. Yeah, sure. I walked quickly, shutting the door behind us as he entered. Hey babe, what's? He didn't finish. I didn't let him. I pounced. This continued for the next week or so. Every day, there was some grand, spontaneous adventure. Tony would text me in the morning with vague instructions or cryptic messages like, bring your smile and your sense of mischief. I'd arrive at the site with my plans in tow, only for Ashley to take them from me without a word, a knowing look in her eyes. Tony would appear, all charm and mischief, and lead me off to somewhere new. We only stepped inside the actual building twice since that first night. It was intoxicating. Each outing was like stepping through a portal. Rooftop dinners, art gallery walkthroughs, live jazz on hidden patios. Even a spontaneous trip to the countryside where we picked wildflowers and made up stories about people in passing cars. He never crossed the line, not fully, but the intimacy was there, just under the surface. The teasing, the soft touches on the small of my back, the way his eyes lingered on me too long. No work was getting done. Not really. And I didn't care. But somewhere deep down, guilt clung to me like a second skin. Larry, Sarah, my mom, they were my entire world. I could close my eyes and picture exactly where each of them was, what they were doing. The way Sarah sang while she colored. The soft sigh Mom made while reading in her chair. The quiet patience Larry had when fixing things he didn't even break. At home, I was the center that kept everything spinning. But with Tony? With Tony, I wasn't a mom worrying about laundry. I wasn't a wife married to a man who solved problems before I could even vent about them. I was a woman again. Just Monica. A woman with spark, with dreams, with the whole world as a playground, and someone looking at her like she was the prize. We started texting more. Just silly things at first. Inside jokes, flirty emojis, harmless banter wrapped in the guise of collaboration. It wasn't cheating, I told myself. We hadn't even kissed. Not really. Then it stopped. One text. Sorry, Nikki. A work issue popped up. I'm going to be away for a bit. I stared at it. Typed out a response, okay. Hope everything's alright. No reply. And just like that, the bubble popped. I was back, thrust into the mundane, into my real life. The house, the chores, the same conversations, the same rhythm. The same everything. At first, I adjusted. I cooked. Cleaned. Kissed Sarah's scraped knee when she fell off her bike. I even folded laundry with Mom while we watched our old shows. But as the days wore on, something inside me tightened. 2 weeks passed. Still no word from Tony. I kept texting him. Little things. Then longer ones. Then desperate ones. By the end of it, I'd sent nearly 30 messages. All unanswered. And it began to show. Everything at home started to grate on me. Sarah's giggles were too loud. Larry's kindness felt like condescension. Mom's observations, like needles under my skin. Larry came to me one night. Gentle as ever. "Babe. Is there anything wrong? I'll help, if I can." I snapped. "No, Larry. I'm not some problem you need to fix. No one asked for your help." The confusion on his face was almost painful to look at. And underneath it, barely contained anger. Larry was patient, but he wasn't a fool. And I'd pushed him close to the edge. Without another word, I retreated into the office, locking the door behind me. I heard my mother murmuring something to him, then footsteps, the front door closing. They'd all gone out. And I sat there. 30 unread messages. 30 digital whispers into the void. And still nothing. Until I broke. I didn't even know why I was crying. But it came in waves, silent, sharp sobs that shook my whole body. It felt like the same ache I had when Tony left all those years ago. The same abandonment. The same emptiness. How could someone disappear twice and leave the same scar both times? Dinner that night was quiet. I was there in body only. I nodded at Sarah's story, I smiled at Mom's comments, I passed Larry the salt when he asked. But I wasn't there. Not really. Larry and I went to bed in silence. I lay next to him, the blue glow of my phone screen the only light in the room, still nothing from Tony. And then, just before I gave up, "Hey Nikki. See you tomorrow?" My heart lit up like a flare. Right there, lying next to my husband, I smiled and typed back, "Yes." Not a shred of guilt. Not even a pause. The address Tony sent wasn't the work site, not even close. That dusty old building hadn't seen either of us in weeks. There was no pretense this time. No blueprints, no flirty messages masked as professional updates, not even a wink. Just an address. A hotel. On the drive over, I rehearsed the lies I'd need to tell myself. It's only one time. I need this. I'll make it up to Larry later. Everyone will be happier if I'm happy. The instincts that once screamed inside me were now dull, quiet, distant. A soft static I could easily ignore. I thought of Larry. I thought of Sarah. Even as the valet took my car. Even as I walked past the front desk, eyes forward. Even as the elevator climbed floor after floor, each ding sounding like a warning I couldn't unhear. Then I knocked. Tony opened the door, barefoot and wearing nothing but a bathrobe, and just like that, every thought of Larry, of Sarah, of the life I had, vanished. He pulled me into him, and I let him. There was no line anymore. No border to toe, no excuse to cling to. In those hours, we made up for years of longing and silence. We whispered, laughed, devoured each other like two people starved of affection. Every flicker of guilt was drowned by the weight of his touch, the heat of his breath, the familiarity of being wanted like that. Later, as I lay next to him, the sun low in the sky and painting the walls with orange hues, Tony rolled toward me, brushing my shoulder with his lips. "I missed that Nikki," he said, kissing my forehead. We ate together, shared stories, held each other like we were the last two people in the world. And when the time came, he kissed my wrist and said, "See you tomorrow, Nikki," like nothing between us had ever been broken. I got home earlier than usual. Sarah was asleep on the living room floor, a half-watched cartoon still flickering across the screen. My mother looked up from her book, gave me a smile, one that saw too much, I feared. I lifted a hand in greeting, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The shower was hot, almost scalding. I let the water hit me until the steam blurred the mirror and my shoulders sagged. And then it came, the sobs I'd held back all day. Until now, I could tell myself it wasn't cheating. No kissing, no touching, no lines crossed. But today? Today I'd crossed all of them. Larry. I thought, what did he do to deserve this? The questions came like a storm. Why did I do this? What did I expect to gain? Was this who I was now? But underneath it all, the worst truth was the simplest: it felt good. It felt damn good to be desired, to be chased, to be touched like I was someone's world again. Dinner was quiet. We went through the motions, me helping Sarah with her fork, Larry making jokes that felt just slightly out of place, Mom humming while she washed dishes. I smiled when I needed to, but it all felt like a play I was acting in, poorly. Later, after tucking Sarah in, I let Larry believe I was still upset. Let him go to bed early, thinking I needed space. And then I slipped into something delicate, something chosen not for comfort but for penance. I crawled into bed beside him, kissed his neck, and gave him all of me. Trying to erase Tony from my skin. Trying to convert guilt into pleasure. Larry didn't know what hit him. His hands were hesitant at first, surprised, then grateful. Afterward, as he held me close, he looked into my eyes. "What was that?" he asked, still catching his breath. "Too much?" I asked, feigning shyness. No, he laughed gently. "It was great. Just, the other day you were mad at me." "I don't even know what I did." I cut him off with a kiss. "Honestly? I don't know either." "I'm sorry, Larry. You didn't deserve that. But what I meant was, you didn't deserve any of this." He studied me. "Are you okay?" And for a second, I almost crumbled. His concern, his steadiness, it made the guilt scream again. But I kept my mask on, leaned my head against his chest. "I don't know," I whispered. I need to work through some things. On my own." He nodded, rubbing my back. "I'm here if you need me." It took me hours to fall asleep. I lay still, watching him breathe, listening to the steady rhythm of a man who trusted me. I made a decision that night. Tony was a mistake. I was going to end it in the morning. I steeled myself. Every word I planned echoed through my head. I practiced them on the drive over, even mouthed them at stoplights like a madwoman. "Tony, this has to end. Larry trusts me. I have a family. I can't keep doing this." I clung to that speech like a lifeline. Same hotel. Same clerk who barely looked up this time. Same room. My stomach churned as I stood at the door. I raised my hand to knock, whispering the first few lines under my breath like a mantra. Tony opened the door. I barely had time to exhale. He kissed me. Full on. No greeting. No space to refuse. By the time we were sitting down to eat later, I was trembling, not from nerves, but from how easily my will had melted away again. "Tony," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "We have to stop this." He looked at me, not surprised. If anything, he looked entertained. Like I'd told a joke with a punchline he'd heard before. I stared down at the floor. "I can't do this to my family. Larry, he trusts me. He loves me." My voice broke. My hands were clenched in my lap, my shoulders drawn in like I was trying to fold myself away from the shame. Tony stood behind me, slipping into the chair, his hands gliding around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder, breath warm against my neck. "Don't stop," he whispered. "Keep going." So I did. I delivered the speech, every single line I'd rehearsed. I said it while he kissed my neck, while his hands explored, while my words twisted into breathy moans. The guilt tangled with the pleasure until they were indistinguishable. I was condemning him, while welcoming him. Telling him to go, while holding on tighter. He took me again, right there, mid-confession. By the time we left the room, hours later, I couldn't even remember how the speech ended. We went on another adventure. A rooftop dinner. A private gallery tour. A stolen moment in a place I'd never been before. By the time I got home, the resolve I'd carried into that hotel was nothing but a memory buried under layers of adrenaline and desire. I cried in the shower. Then I rewarded Larry. That became the pattern. Each time, I told myself, this is the last day. Tony would smile, pull me in, make me whisper my protests, talk about my devotion to Larry again while he made love to me, turning my resolve into foreplay. I cried less in the shower. The guilt still lived in me, but it dulled over time, lost its sting, its urgency. Eventually, I stopped blaming myself altogether. I started blaming Larry. For not noticing. For not being Tony. I started comparing them, counting the differences, justifying the gaps. Tony made me feel like the world spun around me. Larry just kept the lights on. My rewards for Larry became fewer and harder to earn. Not that he knew he was in a competition. He didn't even know the game was happening. I settled into the routine. Hotel rendezvous, texted excuses, guilt-ridden showers, domestic smiles. Rinse. Repeat. The thing about routines is, they make you sloppy. One Saturday afternoon, I was home playing with Sarah on the couch. She was laughing as I tickled her, her little feet kicking, her joy pure and untainted. My phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't think twice. Mom? Can you pass me my phone? She didn't answer. Mom? I repeated, smiling still, hand outstretched. Then I noticed it. She was taking too long. Her back was to me. Her shoulders were tense. She turned slowly, her face pale but her eyes blazing. She held out the phone toward me like it was something toxic. Sure, Nikki, she said, the nickname laced with venom. Here you go. Her eyes locked with mine. Fury. Hurt. A silent accusation. My breath caught in my throat. She knew. Of course, she knew. There was only one person who ever called me Nikki. The one person she never liked. The one person who made me fall to my lowest, who vanished and left me at rock bottom, until Larry picked up the shattered pieces and built the family I was now destroying. My mother's voice cracked with fury as she yelled, her face twisted in something worse than rage, heartbreak and disappointment. I hadn't seen her this angry since I was a teenager. Why, Monica, she pleaded, voice trembling with more pain than fury now. Just explain that to me. I could see it in her eyes, she wanted a reason, something to cling to, something that would let her still see me as her daughter and not the stranger standing in front of her. A reason that would soften the shame that radiated from me like heat. I opened my mouth, but the front door opened before I could speak. Larry walked in, smiling like always, but it slipped from his face the second he felt the tension. Sarah, who had snuck out of the back room we'd stashed her in when voices were raised, ran straight to him. Nana's mad at Mommy, she announced, clinging to his leg. Larry knelt, brushing her hair behind her ear. I see, he said gently, scanning the room. Ladies, he started. Not now, Larry, my mother snapped, her voice like steel. She turned away, walking briskly into her room. Monica, she barked. Now. I lowered my head. Larry, I said, swallowing hard, I have to talk to Mama. Can you take Sarah to her room? He reached out and held my hand, concern etched deep in his face. Is everything okay? I need to talk to Mama, I repeated, my voice cracking. Please, just take Sarah. Larry hesitated. I could see the worry, the fear. My mother had always been the calm center of our storm, always there to pull us back when life went sideways. Larry and I had fought, sure, but when he was drowning in work trying for that promotion, she was the one who helped me keep things together. When I was lashing out after Sarah was born, resenting the shift in my career, she had been the one to explain things to him, and give me the push I needed to move forward. He had never seen her like this, not even close. Still holding my hand, he nodded slowly. Okay, he said, forcing a smile as he scooped up Sarah. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go play tea party. I stood outside my mother's door, suddenly feeling no taller than Sarah. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. She was pacing the room, her arms folded tight across her chest. Without turning, she said, explain it to me, Monica. So I did. I told her everything. About the job, about Tony being behind it, the flirty texts, the hotel rooms, the adventures. I spared her the graphic details, she didn't need those, but she pieced together what I left unsaid. She stared at me, eyes shining with tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this? You risked everything. Larry loves you. Sarah needs you. You had everything, our family, this home." Tears streamed down her face. I didn't have a good answer. I never did. The thrill? Sure. But Larry and I could have found that again if I had just tried. The sex? Larry wasn't bad, just different. All those cruel jabs I'd made at him were deflections, things I said to numb the guilt of what I was doing behind his back. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I was bored, I said, the words falling out of my mouth like broken glass. The weight of it crushed me. Bored. I had thrown away my integrity, betrayed a man who had never given me a reason to doubt him, risked my child's trust, because I was bored, and Tony had a crooked smile and a memory of our past. I looked up. Her face looked calm, but her eyes screamed rage and pain. "So you called me here, had me rebuild my life in a house you intended to tear down," she said, her voice sharp, each word laced with betrayal. "Tell me, Nikki," she spat the name like poison, "was I just supposed to be here to clean up after you? After you split your daughter's family apart, because you were bored?" Her fists were clenched at her sides, trembling. She wanted to strike me, I could feel it, but something held her back. "So what was your plan, Nikki? Run off with Tony and live happily ever after?" "No," I whispered, barely able to speak. "Were you going to divorce Larry and take his child? Or did your lack of conscience let you think you could just leave her with me, like I'd clean up that mess too?" "No, Mama," I said, pleading now. "What was your plan, Nikki?" she asked again, the name landing like a slap. "I don't know." I screamed, the tears coming all over again. "You don't know," she repeated, quietly now, like the words disgusted her. "Are you going to end it?" she asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Her voice broke into a guttural cry as she hurled a book across the room, slamming it into the door. I flinched, eyes shut tight, bracing for more. Then, suddenly, she stopped. "Mom." Larry's voice cut through the madness like a blade. He moved between us, pulling my mother back. "I don't know what's going on with you two, but it ends here and now." He stared her down. "You're scaring my daughter and my wife," he said firmly, shielding me as I sat on the floor, breathless and broken. What the hell is going on? That's when it hit me, why Mama was so furious. It wasn't just what I did. It was what I'd done to her. I'd put her in an impossible position, one that no mother should be in. She had two choices, both of them cruel. She could lie to Larry, the same Larry she loved like a son. The man who welcomed her into his home without hesitation, who built her a space of her own, who chatted with her about her shows, laughed at her stories, and never once treated her like a burden. Even now, as he stood between us, protecting me, he did so with respect. Or she could tell the truth. And in doing so, betray her own daughter. Tear apart a family. Lose the peace and stability of the home she had grown to love, all to protect me from the consequences of my own betrayal. All to cover for a fling with a man who paled in comparison to Larry in every way Mama valued in a man. As soon as Larry asked, Mama's eyes locked onto mine. "See?" they said. "Do you see what you've done?" "It's my fault," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I said some awful things to Mama. I did something stupid." I stumbled over to her, nearly crawling, and laid my head against her chest. The dam broke. I cried like a child, messy, gasping sobs, ashamed of everything I'd done. She didn't hug me right away. Her arms were stiff, her body tense. But slowly, her hand found my hair. She began to stroke it, soft and slow, the way she did when I was small and scared of thunder. "Please," she said gently to Larry. "Let us talk." "Talk?" Larry repeated, his voice sharp, a warning in the word. Mama nodded slowly. "You'll need to put Sarah to bed. This may take a while." Larry hesitated, then turned to leave, closing the door behind him. I looked up at her. Mama. I tried to end it, I said, the words tumbling out in pieces. What am I going to do? Did I ruin everything? Mama sat quietly for a moment, then spoke. Larry isn't stupid, she said evenly. He hasn't noticed because he trusts you. Because he's not looking. But I figured this out from one damn notification on your phone. She shook her head. What would have happened if he looked through your messages? Your laptop? I had no answer. You end it, she said firmly. Tomorrow. End it before he has a reason to dig. And then? I asked, voice trembling. What do I do, Mama? The guilt, before I could bury it. Blame it on others. But I can't anymore. I don't know how to carry this. She sighed. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Her eyes, sharp but tired, settled on me again. First things first. You end it tomorrow. This isn't just about you, baby girl. You're not the only one wrapped up in this anymore. What you do next affects all of us. I nodded, though my stomach churned. I hated myself for dragging her into this. For needing her to carry my burden like she always had. That night, I slept in her room, curled up under her old quilt, my head still aching from tears. Another night telling myself, this is the last time with Tony. And wondering if, this time, I actually believed it. I woke up in the morning and stayed hidden in my mother's room until Larry left for work. She covered for me. I don't know what she told him, but I knew there was a limit to how far she'd lie on my behalf. Larry was a problem for future me. I got dressed under my mother's steeled gaze. She didn't say much, but every look reminded me not to dress too nicely today. No makeup. No perfume. No lipstick. Her silence reminded me of what I had to do, and what I'd lose if I didn't. The softness she showed me last night had vanished, replaced with a cold resolve. Give it to me, she said, holding out her hand. I handed her my phone. She typed quickly, sending a message to Tony, meet me at the coffee shop near the hotel. 10 a.m. that way, you stay upright, she muttered. The jab stung more than I expected. I had no defense. Out, she said. No more advice. No more comfort. I drove to the coffee shop, forcing myself to focus on the road, the hum of the engine, the flick of the turn signal, anything but the conversation I was walking into. When I got there, Tony was already sitting at a table outside, 2 coffees waiting. He smiled when he saw me. That smile used to lift me. Today, it sank my heart. I sat down. Tony, I began before he could say a word, I can't do this anymore. He cocked his head, amused. Then why meet here, Nikki? I mean it, I said, louder than I intended. Then softly, I'm married. So, he replied, shrugging. I'm engaged. The words slammed into me. My eyes widened. What the hell, Tony? You never told me that. You never asked, he said, cool as ever. Wasn't engaged when we started, but remember when I had to go away for a few weeks? I remembered. Weeks of silence. No texts. No calls. I'd spiraled, wondering what I'd done wrong. All that time, he was proposing to someone else. Leaning in, he said, that's why this is perfect, Nikki. We can have both. Tony. I thought we had something. The words spilled out, shame and confusion twisting in my chest. What, Nikki? You were going to leave Larry for me? He smirked. You're adorable. My father would never allow that, not publicly. You and I? Different worlds. Nothing's changed. Then what the hell was this? I asked, my voice trembling. You came back into my life, swept me off my feet, made me feel again. You're a married mother from a side of town my father doesn't even like to admit he came from. And you cheat on your husband, he said flatly. Did you really think I could parade you around on my arm? His words hit harder than a slap, because they weren't lies. They were ugly truths. Rage flared in me. Damn you, Tony. You come in here, destroy my life, and then tell me I'm not good enough for you? He leaned back, eyes unblinking. I didn't destroy your life. You did that all on your own. Driving to that hotel room for work. Going home afterward, acting like everything was fine. Curling up with your husband, still warm from my touch. I wanted to scream. To slap him. Anything to prove his words were wrong. But they weren't. I did those things. All of them. I walked into it. Just come back with me, he said softly, that damn charming tone slithering out again. You've got the perfect alibi. I'll still pay you. And I bet Larry loved the scraps you tossed him after I was done. He chuckled. Don't talk about him like that, I whispered, my hands tightening around the edge of the table. What did I say that you haven't already said? He replied coolly. What were you thinking about while you told me how devoted you were to Larry, in my bed? Stop. The word came out loud. My voice trembled. The problem wasn't Tony. Not really. Tony had just shown me the gap, the space that had grown between who I was and who I was becoming. He reminded me of things I had buried, desires I'd left unexplored. And I mistook that memory for something real. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly I thought the wood might crack. I could feel my whole body shaking, rage, shame, disgust. The barista looked over nervously. I lowered my eyes and took a breath. I wasn't going to give Tony another piece of me. Not now. Not ever. You're fun, Nikki. We are fun, Tony said, flashing that casual, disarming smile at the barista as he ordered another espresso. He turned back to me with an almost lazy shrug. Stop trying to make this into something it's not. He leaned against the counter, smirking. With your clueless husband paying for interior design work, we can have our cake and eat it too. No one gets hurt, and we have our fun. Don't ruin it, he said, already growing bored of the conversation. I sank into the chair behind me, burying my face in my hands. My mother was right about you, I said, my voice thick with tears I refused to shed in front of him. I didn't listen. I never listened. But she was always right. I lifted my gaze to meet his. He could see it in my eyes, the fun was over. Tony sighed dramatically, tapping his cup against the table. Nikki, I like our arrangement, but I can see the timing might be off for you right now. So, how about we take a break? I was going to have to anyway because of my marriage and honeymoon coming up, he said with that same wicked smile that always seemed to awaken the worst in me. Then, he added, reaching across the table for my hand, maybe we revisit things later, once I get everything settled. I yanked my hand away, my voice like ice. Tony, I will never let you touch me again. I am devoted to Larry and my family. I will never betray them again. A glint of something darker flickered across his face. Instead of being deterred, he leaned back, grinning wider. You have no idea how much it turns me on when you say things like that, Nikki, he said, his voice dripping with a twisted kind of lust. And that was when it hit me. It was never about me. Never about the affair. What excited Tony was the betrayal, corrupting the very things I held sacred. Watching me fall, watching me break. That was his true pleasure. I stood abruptly, gathering what little dignity I had left, and walked out without another word, my heels clicking against the floor in defiance. I drove home, my hands trembling against the steering wheel, holding on to my crumbling facade until I stumbled into my mother's arms. Only then did I allow myself to break. I was so stupid, Mama, I sobbed, clinging to her. You were right, about everything, and now I don't know what to do. My mother stroked my hair, whispering soothing words. Sarah was still fast asleep in her room, blissfully unaware of the storm tearing through her family. You have to tell Larry, Mama said gently, but firmly. I jerked back, horrified. No, Mama. He'll leave me. He might, she said, her voice kind but steady. Or he might find a way to forgive you. You've given him a happy family. That may count for something. Couples have survived worse. I clung to her words like a drowning woman to driftwood, though I barely dared hope. Just as I was about to respond, my phone buzzed with a new notification. I wiped my face and glanced down. An email from Tony's company. I opened it with shaking fingers. It was a formal letter, ending our contract. They praised my excellent work and offered to collaborate again in the future. On the surface, it would have been flattering, had I not known the true nature of the work they referred to. Another notification flashed. This time from my bank. Not the joint account, my personal one. $900,000 had been transferred. The note simply read, "For services rendered." "Mama," I cried out, shoving the screen toward her. "Look." She squinted at it, then at me, confusion and horror battling on her face. "Is that how much you normally get paid for these jobs?" she asked hesitantly. "No," I yelled, panicking. For a project like that, I would have made $60,000, maybe, after completing a full stage. Negotiations for more would have come after. Not this, not this. I stared at her, desperate for an explanation that didn't exist. Mama's mouth set into a hard, grim line. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'm pretty sure that's why Tony did it." Her words hit me like a slap. She was right. It was Tony's final joke, his ultimate betrayal. It wasn't enough to ruin my marriage. He wanted to brand me as something worse in Larry's eyes. It was one thing to admit I had cheated. It was another to admit I had sold myself. Tears blurred my vision. "Mama," I whispered hoarsely, "we have to hide this. I can't tell Larry. Tony's setting me up." Mama looked at me long and hard. I could see the battle raging in her, her instinct to demand the truth and her desperate need to protect me. Finally, her shoulders sagged in defeat. "Transfer me the money, baby," she said, her voice breaking. "And get every message off your phone. From now on. You better be the perfect damned wife." She turned away, leaving the room in tears. She had made her choice. She would lie to protect me, to protect my betrayal, from the man who had only ever treated her with love and respect. I cursed Tony with every breath. Even in leaving, he had managed to corrupt my mother too. Larry came home not long after, surprised but smiling when he saw me. "You're back already?" he asked, pulling me into a kiss. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "The project's over." "I'm sorry to hear that," he said sincerely. "I know you really wanted it to work out." I shook my head, stopping him. "No. You were right. It was a bad idea. I'm glad it's over." And I meant it. Because now, I knew, I would carry this secret to my grave. I had to. I could not lose Larry. I could not lose Sarah. I would spend the rest of my life, every single breath, trying to atone for what I had done. 5 months later, I sat quietly in my chair, my hands resting gently on the small but unmistakable curve of my belly, the new life joining our family growing day by day. In the kitchen, Mama was busy cooking dinner, with little Sarah standing on a stool beside her, eagerly acting as her helper. A soft peace had settled over my life, a kind of peace I had never truly known before. The nightmares of Tony and everything he represented haunted me less and less with each passing day. Watching my mother and daughter laugh over mixing bowls and spilled flour, I wondered what I had ever been searching for, what could have possibly driven me to risk it all. The sound of the front door swinging open broke my thoughts. My heart lifted instinctively. Larry was home. A smile stretched across my face as I rose to greet him. Sarah, squealing with excitement, rushed toward him too. But something made her stop. Larry wasn't smiling. He said nothing, only brushed past us, his steps heavy and deliberate. He disappeared into his office and, with a sharp click, locked the door behind him. Mama wiped her hands on a towel, her brow furrowing slightly. "Maybe a bad day at work," she suggested, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her concern. We listened to the sounds of drawers opening, papers shuffling, objects shifting. The noise went on for what felt like forever. 30 minutes, maybe longer, and then, silence. I gave him a little more time, my heart beating a little faster with every tick of the clock, then walked over and knocked softly. "Honey?" I called through the door. "Is everything okay?" No answer. Another 30 minutes crawled by before the door finally creaked open. Larry emerged, his face pale, his mouth pressed into a hard line. In his hands, he held a folder, one from his job, I guessed. He had been trying for a project, something important. One look at him told me he hadn't gotten it. I moved toward him to offer comfort, but he shifted away from me, his whole body tense. "I got a project today," he said, his voice low, almost hollow, his eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the walls of our home. When they gave me the photos for it, they looked familiar. Like I had seen them before. He paused, struggling. So I went to the site to take a look. And when I saw the address, his voice broke off, his hands clenching around the folder so tightly that the edges crumpled. Mama and I exchanged a worried glance. Sarah, sensing the tension, pressed against Mama's leg, wide-eyed. "The address," Larry said, lifting his gaze to mine at last, no longer confused, no longer broken, but furious. "It was the place we found the night you went missing." I felt the blood drain from my face. He stepped closer, the weight of his anger filling the room. "I went inside," he said, his voice growing colder with each word. I looked around. "This was the project you claimed you had been working on for months." But no work had been done. With a rough movement, he dropped a handful of photos onto the floor between us, the very pictures I had once used to explain my absence. They fluttered down like accusations, showing a building that stood untouched, abandoned, unchanged. "I started wondering," he continued, each word like a hammer blow, "with all the time you spent there, away from the family, away from me, what were you really doing?" I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My legs buckled, and I sank back into my chair, trembling. Mama, realizing what was coming, quietly ushered Sarah from the room. Her eyes met mine briefly, a silent message of strength before she disappeared with my daughter into the safety of the hallway. "I spoke to the client," Larry said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "A man named Tony Milton." My hands gripped the arms of the chair, trying to steady myself. He laughed when I asked about the decorator he hired. "Said she was passionate," Larry spat bitterly. That's all he said. Then, slowly, almost ceremoniously, Larry pulled out another piece of paper, a copy of a bank transfer for $900,000. The secret I had hidden from him. The secret that was now shredding our life apart. "So I started thinking," he said, his voice rising, barely controlled. "What the hell did my wife do for that kind of money, when no work was ever done?" The final words came out in a roar, rattling the walls of the house and sending shudders through my already broken heart. He stood there, waiting, demanding answers I didn't have, or couldn't bear to give. "Well, Monica," he snarled. "Do you care to explain?" I looked into his face, a face I barely recognized, twisted in a rage I had never seen before, and realized that every careful lie, every desperate cover-up, had led us here. Mama returned to the doorway, her face pale, her hands wringing anxiously, but she had no words to offer me either. The walls seemed to close in, the world growing smaller, colder, crueler by the second. I knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, this was the true enjoyment Tony had wanted all along. And I had walked right into it.